The world's first nuclear explosion occurred on July 16, 1945, when a plutonium implosion device was tested at a site located 210 miles south of Los Alamos on the barren plains of the Alamogordo Bombing Range. Hoisted atop a 100-foot tower, the plutonium device, or gadget, detonated at precisely 5:30 a.m. over the New Mexico desert, releasing 18.6 kilotons of power, instantly vaporizing the tower and turning the surrounding asphalt and sand into green glass. Seconds after the explosion came an enormous blast, sending searing heat across the desert and knocking observers to the ground. The first ever nuclear explosion had to pass the test and was ready for military usage. After the Trinity test, scientists at Los Alamos had developed two distinct types of atomic bombs by 1945, a uranium-based design called the Little Boy and a plutonium-based weapon called the Fat Man. While the war in Europe had ended, fighting in the Pacific continued between Japanese forces and US troops. As a result, in late July that year, President Harry Truman called for Japan's surrender with the Potsdam Declaration. The declaration promised prompt and utter destruction if Japan did not surrender. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped its first atomic bomb from a B-29 bomber plane called the Enola Gay over the city of Hiroshima, Japan. The Little Boy exploded within about 13 kilotons of force, leveling 5 square miles of the city and killing 80,000 people instantly. Tens of thousands more would later die from radiation exposure. When the Japanese did not immediately surrender, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb 3 days later on the city of Nagasaki. The Fat Man killed an estimated 40,000 people on impact. Nagasaki had not been the primary target for the second bomb. American bombers initially had targeted the city of Kokura, where Japan had one of its largest munition plants, but smoke from firebombing raids obscured the sky over Kokura. American planes then turned towards their secondary target, Nagasaki. The real mortality of the atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan will never be known. The destruction and overwhelming chaos made orderly counting impossible. It is not unlikely that the estimates of killed and wounded in Hiroshima, 150,000, and Nagasaki, 75,000, are over-conservative. However, these events begs the question, should we ban nuclear weapons? And if we do, can an enemy country develop them in secret and one day use them for world domination? It is human nature to test, to observe, and to dream. The history of nuclear energy is the story of a centuries-old dream becoming a reality. Ancient Greek philosophers first developed the idea that all matter is composed of invisible particles called atoms. Scientists in the 18th and 19th centuries revised the concept based on their experiments. By the year 1900, physicists knew the atom contained large quantities of energy. British physicist Ernest Rutherford was called the father of nuclear science because of his contribution to the theory of atomic structure. In 1904, he wrote, "If it were ever possible to control at will the rate of disintegration of the radio elements, an enormous amount of energy could be obtained from a small amount of matter." Albert Einstein developed his theory of the relationship between mass and energy 1 year later. The mathematical formula is E equals mc squared, or energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. In 1934, physicist Enrico Fermi conducted experiments in Rome that showed neutrons could split many kinds of atoms. The results surprised even Fermi himself. When he bombarded uranium with neutrons, he did not get the elements he expected. The elements were much lighter than uranium. In the fall of 1938, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann fired neutrons from a source containing the elements radium and beryllium into uranium. They were surprised to find lighter elements, such as barium, in the leftover materials. These elements had about half the atomic mass of uranium. In previous experiments, the leftover materials were only slightly lighter than uranium. Hahn and Strassmann contacted Lise Meitner in Copenhagen before publicizing their discovery. She was an Austrian colleague who had been forced to flee Nazi Germany. She worked with Niels Bohr and her nephew, Otto R. Fritsch. Meitner and Fritsch thought the barium and other light elements in the leftover material resulted from the uranium splitting, or fissioning. However, when she added the atomic masses of the fission products, they did not total the uranium's mass. Meitner used Einstein's theory to show the lost mass changed to energy. This proved fission occurred and confirmed Einstein's work, and so begun our journey towards nuclear energy and weapons of mass destruction. So with all being said, is banning nuclear weapons a good idea, realistically speaking? Well, to answer that, let's talk about the United Nations, or the UN for short. Established on October 24, 1945 by 51 countries, the UN was formed to maintain peace through the cooperation of its member countries. Today, 193 countries, also called member states, strive to uphold international peace and security. With nearly all countries, large and small, rich and poor, being a part of the UN serves as a forum for different countries to discuss solutions to issues ranging from arms control and terrorism to the international enforcement of human rights. When a country becomes a UN member, the country agrees to settle any disputes peacefully, to not use force or threats against other countries, and to refrain from helping any nation that opposes the UN's actions. The members also agree to accept the UN Charter, which states that the UN's four main purposes are to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, cooperate in solving international problems and in promoting respect for human rights, and providing a forum for bringing countries together to meet the UN's purpose and goals. The UN is made up of 6 bodies that have specific functions: the General Assembly, Security Council, Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, Secretariat, and International Court of Justice. The General Assembly is the main body of the UN and is made up of representatives from all member states. Economic and social work is coordinated by the Economic and Social Council, while the Trusteeship Council handles non-self-governing territories as they progress towards independence. An international staff works within the Secretariat to facilitate the day-to-day activities of the UN. One of the most important aspects of the UN's international power is its responsibility to maintain peace and security among nations, a power held by the Security Council. The International Court of Justices, also known as the World Court, is the judicial branch of the UN and is the main forum for deciding disputes among countries. Both the Security Council and the International Court of Justices play an important role in the UN's development and enforcement of international law, as these decisions are binding. The UN also asserts the right of the Security Council to be the only entity with the power to declare international uses of legitimate military force against a country. United Nations peacekeepers have taken part in a total of 72 missions around the globe, 14 of which continue today. The UN enacted the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons in 1970, 25 years later after the detonations of Nagasaki, which is an international treaty to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and technology. It also aims to promote peaceful use of nuclear energy. The NPT is the largest arms control treaty in the world, with its acceptance among 190 nations. India, Pakistan, Israel, and South Sudan have, however, abstained from signing the treaty and have developed nuclear weapons regardless, and Iran is next on the list. The latter showing proof that the UN isn't always good at preventing chaos. So why is banning nuclear weapons a bad idea? Because treaties have a historical precedent of failing. One of the most notable examples was the Treaty of Versailles, signed to bring peace after World War I by the League of Nations, a precursor to the UN, along with early human rights provisions. However, the treaty failed since it eventually led to the exploitation of Germany, which later culminated into World War II. Additionally, it is important to note that all nuclear policy are formed around the concept of deterrence. Look scary enough and people won't attack you. This doesn't exclusively apply to nuclear weapons, but all military buildup in general. Before nuclear weapons, navies prior and during World War I were used as a sort of deterrence, such as the Dreadnought Navy ship, because they were expensive to operate, and this cost was a way of showing potential enemies a country's resolve in the fighting. This concludes that nuclear weapons quite literally keep the world powers from going to war with each other. The US will never invade Russia, and Russia will never do anything to bring war to the US or Pakistan, and India will always try to find a diplomatic solution to avoid an all-out nuclear war. Nukes have become a sort of political boundary keeper and stopped being weapons a long time ago. This is called a costly signal. So with all that being said, assuming we hypothetically ban all nuclear weapons throughout the world, What stops and keeps a country in the likes of North Korea in check from secretly developing nuclear weapons, even if it defies the treaty to gain power over its enemies and world domination? You tell us.